Hey, welcome to Socialism for All. Today's date is February 8, 2022, and in this video I want to talk about an article from The Guardian. It's dated 3rd of February 2022, just a few days ago, by Danny Anguiano, and it's titled, California County on Track to be Run by Militia-Aligned Group. Shasta County's recall efforts highlight how distrust in the government has led to increasing extremism in local politics. You can see in the picture there that on top of that structure, there's a banner that says State of Jefferson. So for people outside the U.S., Jefferson is not currently a U.S. state. However, there have been efforts going back to the 1940s. There was a major effort in 1941, just prior to the U.S.'s entry into World War II, of Northern California and parts of Southern Oregon, the state right above California, to not secede from the United States, but to form its own state. Basically, they felt that the rural parts of Northern California, which were more socially conservative, politically conservative, were not being represented well, and they wanted to form their own state. I mean, cool story, and maybe that would have been the case, although as soon as you make your own city, that's going to be more socially progressive as well, and then the cycle goes on, I guess. But anyway, in November 1941, the proponents of this went as far as to stop traffic on the highway, holding rifles, and hand out pamphlets saying that this area was in, quote, patriotic rebellion against the states of California and Oregon, and would continue to, quote, secede every Thursday until further notice. I guess it's like TGIF, but more racist. And, you know, you're saying, oh, hey, S4A, these are rural people who want to form their own state because their politics are so conservative. How do you know that they're racist? Well, yeah. So if you go back through the history of Oregon, which was founded in the 1850s, which of course was the time just prior to the U.S. Civil War, when questions of, hey, should we keep doing this racialized slavery thing, kept coming up. And it was hugely politically charged. So if you were forming a state at that time, you kind of had to decide, were you going to be a slave state or a free state? And the approach by some of the founders of Oregon, for example, George Williamson, was kind of a neither nor approach. They were not going to do slavery, but they also didn't want free black people. So it was like kind of intended to be this white supremacist state that was just sort of somehow above it all. This is, of course, also just totally sidestepping and ignoring the question of indigenous nations, just sort of taken for granted at that point that, you know, well, they'll do what we say or we'll kill them. So that's pretty much, you know, people want to understand, you know, U.S. politics, the many layers of oppression going on here. There's a lot to it. All right, so the first push, like I said, for the state of Jefferson was 1941. Then you get another one in the late 80s into the early 90s. And then more recently, this topic has surfaced again, as people have pointed out, like, hey, a lot of these northern rural counties went for Trump, and if it was its own state that had its own electors, you know, who knows what would have happened. Anyway, so that's what's been going on. I'd like to give a little additional context. As a commenter mentioned, this whole area, you know, people think of the cities like San Francisco or Portland, Oregon, Seattle, Washington as kind of, you know, more liberal and progressive as cities usually are. However, you get away from the coast, more east, and it is, quote, Turner Diaries territory. Turner Diaries, of course, being a sort of manifesto in fiction form. It is the fictional account of a race war started by neo-Nazis who eventually become victorious. Speaking of fiction, there's a movie that came out, I don't know, about 5 years ago called Green Room that's set in this area, and it's kind of the same thing. It's like a left-wing punk band that accidentally stumbles into like a Nazi club and things go badly. So anyway, there's a lot going on in this area that may not be covered or represented well in the open media. A lot of neo-Nazis, very far-right people, white supremacists, you know. You see some of the more acceptable public face is the anti-vax stuff. It's usually tied into much deeper stuff. For example, the Northwest Territorial Imperative. So this is a concept pushed by some neo-Nazi groups that would basically take Northwest states like Wyoming, Montana, Idaho, Washington, Oregon, maybe Northern California, and turn them into an ethno-state, a, quote, white Christian republic or white American bastion, white Aryan bastion, etc. If you remember Randy Weaver and the Ruby Ridge standoff with the federal government some 30 years ago, that guy had moved to this area as part of the Northwest Territorial Imperative idea. Basically, when the United States is not already white supremacist enough for you, what do? This is the kind of thing. So I saw this article and it was interesting enough on its own, but I'm following up with it now because it dovetails nicely with the last story that I just put up about the Flu Trucks Klan, the Canadian, quote, Freedom Convoy 2022, sort of pseudo right-wing populist thing, reminiscent to me of the time that Donald Trump had that photo op behind the wheel of a big rig and was making that screaming face. I mean, that's basically what you got going on. You know, they pick some symbol of the working class and then astroturf it, and then there you go. Suddenly, you've got all kinds of dupes, you know, championing this as some movement of the working class. It's very typical, you know, like what the Republican Party does. You take an investment banker, put him in cowboy boots and a pickup truck, suddenly he's a man of the people. It's like they did with George W. Bush, you know, country club kid, his dad's the vice president, head of the CIA, grows up in Connecticut, but no, give him a ranch down in Texas, have him clear some brush, suddenly he's, you know, a guy you'd like to have a beer with. I just really would like to fast forward to the day when people stop falling for this garbage because it's just sickening. But anyway, as commenters pointed out on that video, no actual trucker has the time to be involved in this. They're out actually working. Also, truckers are facing a number of issues: increased surveillance, wage pressures, all kinds of things. And this movement is about what? Some far right thing, vaccine mandates. So, you know, you got AstroTurf money coming in through the GoFundMe. There have been donations as high as 200,000, and they're coming from the United States. Yeah, because a lot of truckers just have $200,000. You know it's working class when people are dumping in $10,000, $20,000, $200,000. So, I don't know. Just please, please, please get it sometime soon, people. Sometime soon. But anyway, why that's relevant here, especially, is, as we showed in that video, the organizers of the convoy, the lead people, the people responsible for the GoFundMe, and other major pieces of infrastructure for that protest, are also members of and organizers of and leaders of other far-right movements, such as the Sons of Odin anti-immigrant group or the Wexit project. What is Wexit? It's, well, Western and Exit. It's basically the Western provinces of Canada trying to secede. So, in other words, take the Northwest Territorial Imperative in the United States and just mirror it over the Canadian border. That's basically what you get. So now let's turn back to this article and get some up close and personal details with some of the people involved in this effort to have Northern California secede and create the state of Jefferson. A retired police chief and self-described Reagan Republican with decades of public service. Comment, okay, so we got a police chief, Reagan Republican, very reactionary. Leonard Modi checked all the boxes to represent his community in one of California's most conservative counties. But on Tuesday, voters ousted Modi, handing control of the Shasta County Board of Supervisors to a group aligned with local militia members. The election followed nearly 2 years of threats and increasing hostility toward the longtime supervisor and his moderate colleagues in response to pandemic health restrictions. Time out. So what do we have? We have a guy who is already a cop, like super cop, police chief, Reagan Republican, very reactionary, and he's being ousted by who? Local militias. Because why? Not conservative enough. This is what I was saying before in the other story about the Freedom Convoy, when the Conservative Party, according to one of them, had been, quote, infected with political Islam, which was rotting it like a syphilis. This is when right-wing politics, and arguably Reagan was pretty far right, gets, it's not enough for them, the Nazis, and they need to take it a step further. This is where you're actually edging into actual fascism. Not just very conservative management of the empire, which is genocidal and austere in its own right, but just balls out anything goes fascism. And it will eventually be bankrolled by the big bourgeoisie. We know that that's happening behind the scenes. We've looked at, for example, actually one of the first videos that we did on the COVID reopen protests is that they were linked to Koch brothers and the DeVos family, various shadowy network of funding organizations. But yeah, these quote right-wing populists, they don't want to end capitalism. They don't want to challenge private property rights. In fact, if anything, what is this over? The pandemic health restrictions. So they want, more freedom. This is basically, why libertarians are crypto-fash. Their solution to everything is, quote, more freedom, more capitalism, more rights for capital. That's what they're all about. I think hopefully if you're listening to this channel for a while, the idea of collaborating with these people it's just not going to work, okay? So, the thing that they want is fundamentally the exact opposite of the thing that we want. For them, the retired police chief Reaganite is not conservative enough. They need to go further. And why? Pandemic health restrictions. Continuing. While it's not yet clear who will replace Modi, the two candidates in the lead attended a celebration on Tuesday with members of an area militia group, the Sacramento Bee reported. The recall is a win for the ultra-conservative, just say fascist, movement in Shasta County, which has fought against moderate Republican officials. So again, Reaganites are not moderate, and sought to gain a foothold in local government in this rural part of Northern California. It also highlights a phenomenon that extends far beyond the region, as experts warn that the pandemic and eroding trust in U.S. institutions has fueled extremism in local politics and hostility against officials that could reshape governments from school boards to county supervisors to Congress. So pause there. What does eroding trust in U.S. institutions mean? If we peel back that term, what's going on there? Because there is eroding trust in U.S. institutions, as increasingly more people are proletarianized, and there's a housing crisis, there's a student debt crisis, there's a medical debt crisis. There's all these combined crises of capitalism going on. People don't trust U.S. institutions. As Joe Biden's COVID response czar, Jeff Zients, said in a story we covered a few weeks ago, the social contract is gone. Except when he said it, he's a guy from Bain Capital. He was basically leading the charge to tear up the social contract and basically have workers, dangling freely for our lives from this, rotting edifice of U.S. empire. He wasn't sounding the alarm on that. He was the one steering the ship. And as capitalism goes into deeper and deeper crises, fascism is always something that surfaces as the bourgeoisie seeks to regain some kind of control of society and especially avert any kind of a left-wing revolutionary situation. We have a whole playlist on the channel, Understanding Right-Wing Movements and Fascism. Please check it out if you want to get up to speed on this. It includes both modern examples and things from a century ago, when Italian fascism was just coming about. There will be some kind of populist appeals thrown in there, but basically it's taking radical rhetoric and spinning it in favor of the status quo, property rights, capitalism. All right, continuing. I think it's going to be a change in our politics. I think we're going to shift more to the alt-right side of things, Modi said on Wednesday, quote, I really thought my community would step up to the plate, and they didn't, and that's very discouraging, unquote. So, I know I've broken in with a lot of comments. Basically, you got this Shasta County Board of Supervisors. They pulled a recall to get the Reagan Republican retired police chief out of there because he wasn't conservative enough, and one of the main issues was pandemic health restrictions. Continuing, located more than 2 hours from California's more densely populated state capital, Sacramento, Shasta County has long been a conservative bastion and home to a thriving State of Jefferson movement, which advocates for secession from California and the formation of a new state. But it was also the sort of place where people could work through their differences to achieve common goals, said Modi, who had served as a supervisor since 2009. After the pandemic took hold in 2020, and the associated economic crisis that we're still experiencing, and the governor instituted lockdown measures, however, many residents were outraged by the restrictions and what they viewed as the failure of county officials to stand up to the state government. Shasta County was among the least restrictive in California, Modi said. See, again, very conservative person. but residents unhappy about state rules and mask requirements, oh no, not masks, began showing up in meetings in large numbers. Modi and other supervisors were soon subjected to levels of anger and hostility once reserved for state officials. That's funny. In what Lisa Pruitt, a rural law expert at the University of California, Davis, describes as a trickling down effect. Quote, there's a lot of pent-up anger by a lot of people in rural and quasi-rural places that they're not getting a fair shake from the government, she said. Quote, most of that has been directed at state government. The anger at state officials is now trickling down at local officials because people think my local officials aren't doing enough, unquote. Carlos Zapata, a local militia member who helped organize the recall efforts, in 2020 told the board there could be blood in the streets if the supervisors didn't reject state health rules, such as mask requirements. Pause. So literally, you're threatening blood in the streets because people are asked to wear face masks during a pandemic. That's the kind of people we're dealing with. Quote, this is a warning for what's coming. It's not going to be peaceful much longer. Okay, pausing the quote here. If you listen to right-wing radio, particularly Patriot Radio, the kind of shit that Alex Jones used to do that they broadcast on like shortwave, networks like GCN and RBN, they pump people full of this shit 24/7. It is constant. Like, everything that this guy says is just the kind of thing that they have been saying since the 90s. They're so ready for it, and they don't even know what the issue is, because one day it's chemtrails, the next day it's 5G, whatever. They don't know. The big bourgeoisie, through their funding, and also very reactionary, more petty bourgeois, people who are kind of on the edge between petty bourgeois and the big bourgeoisie, just dump money into this shit, and they keep people like this just terrified of, you know, the black helicopters and the reds are coming in and whatever. There's basically zero rational discussion, and all of it sounds like this. Starting the quote again, quote, this is a warning for what's coming. It's not going to be peaceful much longer. It's going to be real. I've been in combat and I never wanted to go back again. But I'm telling you what, I will to stay in this country. If it has to be against our own citizens, it will happen. And there's a million people like me and you won't stop us, he said. The rhetoric was a marked change from anything Modi had seen while in office. Quote, this is not the community I grew up in. I was surprised people would make sort of veiled threats toward public officials and push the envelope, he said. Disruptions and threatening rhetoric have been seen in public meetings across the country in what experts view as an alarming development. Pause. So just go back to the Tea Party. Before it was the Tea Party, it was like the Super Patriot movement, sovereign citizens. Actually, I remember there was some guy, I think his name was Johnny Liberty. He was out of this area, Northern California, and it was, you know, all the, basically if you sign your name a certain way on checks, like you can avoid using the Federal Reserve's fake communist money and whatever, and that was out of this Pacific Northwest area too. Insane stuff, but it's been around a long time. That is just starting to really gather momentum. People like Donald Trump are lightning rods for it. I think that the Republican Party, after Bush and Cheney, had pretty much burned out any credibility and goodwill that their, you know, more mainstream wing had. And they had to revert to these Tea Party berserkers, shock troops of fascism, to, you know, it was the new face of the Republican Party. You know, and this guy has a lot of nerve being, you know, a Reaganite. Basically, I mean, when Reagan and the moral majority and all that stuff came out in the 80s, it was pretty shocking because comparatively, the country had been a lot more liberal than that. And you had these Republicans, you know, elbowing everybody out of the way, greed is good and all that kind of stuff. And now they're the ones who are, you know, I am just shocked and appalled that there are Tea Party fascists coming out of the woodwork, you know, heavens to Betsy. It's happening right under your nose, and a major political party is actively encouraging it. It's where they're organizing. The Republican Party is doing this. I mean, and then there's, of course, the stuff that's happening outside the Republican Party as well. It's extremely alarming. The United States kind of is on the verge of a fascist coup. And, of course, the Democratic Party, who will wring their hands and clutch their pearls about it, they are the ones standing in the position to actually do something about it. The Republican Party could be shattered into 1,000 tiny pieces, reduced to a purely regional party with no influence on national politics whatsoever. Maybe they could control a few of the more backward states for some time, but they could be driven out of national politics if the Democratic Party formed any kind of a coalition with the left, adopted some of the overwhelmingly popular reforms, and the Republican Party would be swept into the dustbin of history in 6 to 8 years tops. There'd be no more discussion about Republicans filibustering because they'd probably have 15 senators at most. So not only do we have the Reagan Republican police chief county official saying, I don't know where this is coming from, but also the Democratic Party that claims to be, anti-fascist and whatever. They won't lift a goddamn finger. And in fact, they will stand in our way. They will stand in the way of the left of actually doing anything about this. So there you go. All right. Disruptions and threatening rhetoric have been seen in public meetings across the country in what experts view as an alarming development. In Oregon, a county commission moved to virtual meetings last month due to anti-mask protesters. A parent in Virginia was arrested after threatening to bring guns if officials didn't make masks optional. Quote, "Distrust in government has permeated the most local levels," said Colin Clark, a terrorism expert. Quote, "I'm familiar with the indicators of extremism and radicalization. I see them in places I never expected to see them. If you had told me, as a terrorism expert, I'd be talking about school boards, I'd have said you're crazy," unquote. Anti-government extremists have utilized fears around the pandemic as a recruiting tool, Clark said. Quote, "The whole pandemic was really tailor-made to far-right extremists, and they're getting a whole lot of mileage out of it," unquote. I think that that's a absolutely horrible way of phrasing this. The pandemic was tailor-made to far-right extremists. Literally, that's what they believe. They believe it's like the plandemic and all this stuff. If you're a terrorism expert, you're an anti-government extremist expert, and you're phrasing things like that. Anyway, you wonder why we're in the position we're in. I'm going to have more comments on this later, as in what do we do about this? Continuing. Politics in Shasta County has only become more hostile and contentious. In 2020, voters elected a new supervisor, Patrick Jones, who has been critical of Modi and other supervisors. In January 2020, Jones and Supervisor Les Baugh opened the doors to the supervisors' chambers and allowed members of the public into what was supposed to be a virtual meeting due to COVID cases. Modi has accused Jones, who has been a vocal supporter of the recall, of riling up the public. Jones did not respond to the Guardian's request for comment. He told KQED, quote, "We've been demonized as radicals and various things like that. We are not. We are just simply, wait for it, business owners." Well, at some point, I think we can just consider capitalism extreme and the people who want to hold on to capitalism as extremists. So, yeah, at some point, I sure hope that we do decide that wanting to have privately controlled means of production is an extreme, antisocial, reactionary, harmful notion. All right, continuing. We're just simply business owners. And then unrelated concept, we're mothers, we're fathers, we're grandmothers, we're grandfathers. Yeah, so's everybody. And we want to return to a county where we grew up, a safe, prosperous county that we can be proud of, unquote. So you want safety and prosperity, but you don't actually want to understand society at all. And you don't want to wear masks during a pandemic, but you want it to be safe. Do you even stand for anything? Do you have any clue as to what is actually happening? Do you have any understanding of the forces that shape society that you are trying in vain to fight against? And I say in vain, of course they can do things that will have effects. They won't actually result in any kind of a positive, lasting outcome. But people like this can do a tremendous amount of damage in the meantime. Continuing. The board elected to hold a meeting last month virtually due to rising COVID cases and threats against Modi and other supervisors. The Shasta County Sheriff's Office is investigating what it described as credible threats against Modi and two other board members. One person told Modi that bullets are expensive, but, quote, ropes are reusable. That's a quote. The Reading Record Searchlight reported this week that an election official said that they had been subjected to bullying in the lead up to the election. Yeah, I mean, commenting, I think saying ropes are reusable is a little bit more than bullying. I know that they weren't maybe referring to that specific example. Um, so you've got credible threats coming in. Can we add the racial component? Like these are, I'm presuming white people doing this because if anyone else did this, what would happen? And oh no, I'm playing the race card now. This is called reality. Continuing. Meanwhile, money poured into the county in support of the recall from an outsider, a millionaire, Reverge, or Reverge, I'm not sure how to pronounce that, Anselmo. His $400,000 donation to the gathering committee in the recall is believed to be one of the largest in the county. Pause. So Reverge Anselmo, or Reverge, I'm really not sure. Who is this person? The article does not say, which to me is like journalistic malpractice, because look this guy up. He comes from New York City and Connecticut. He is the son of a billionaire. He is a film producer and vineyard owner who also helped to set up Catholic monasteries in Chile. This was after being a U.S. Marine. So basically a fascist. So remember what I said before about the more reactionary elements of the upper petty bourgeoisie and the big bourgeoisie funding fascists? Here you go. Here's your astroturfing right here. This fight in Shasta County is also personal to this douchebag because he was trying to set up a restaurant and winery and maybe vineyard in Shasta County, and he feels that the zoning commission or whatever like screwed him over. So that's partly why he decided to dump about $500,000 into this race. They will tell you all day long it's about freedom and justice in the American way. All they really mean is the freedom to exploit and get richer. That's all this is to them. And they are more than willing to exploit the ignorance and superstition of the poor local quasi-peasantry. I mean, we don't properly have a peasantry anymore, but, you know, of the ignorant locals, he is happy to stand on your head to get what he wants at your expense, while keeping you in ignorance, while keeping you in the dark about how your society actually works and how to actually improve your life. He won't tell you that his interests as a capitalist are diametrically opposed to your interest as a worker or, you know, very small petty bourgeois business person. He won't tell you that people like him ruin people like you and me and keep us broke and scrambling to, you know, just struggling to get from one day to the next. He won't tell you that. I'll tell you that, and he'll tell you to go fucking threaten me and beat me up and whatever else. Because I'm saying that. So, are you starting to get the picture now? This isn't fucking populist. This is fucking millionaires wanting to become billionaires. That's what it is. Continuing, polling numbers on Wednesday showed 52% of voters opted to recall Modi. The success of the recall will likely set up more conflict between the local government and the state government, Pruitt said. Modi is done with politics, he says. He plans to stay in Shasta County, quote, for now, but worries for the future of the area and that it could become a haven for those with extremist views. For many Shasta County citizens, he said, quote, they're going to get a rude awakening, unquote. Well, that's the end of the article. That's a little bit of a slice of what's going on in these right-wing populist movements. They're astroturfed, just like the Tea Party was, just like everything was before that. I mean, we don't need to keep debating this. The evidence is there. The record is clear for anyone to see. And it's time for aspiring socialists to stop playing dumb about this stuff. I get that coalitions of working people may not all be 100% on the same page about every social issue. That said, there is industrial strength, ignorance, and extremism being promoted by far-right funding networks, and we cannot tiptoe around this and just be like, oh, well, you and your damn purity tests. No, you need to actually confront fascism. Which brings me to what I said about what to do about this. You know, the question of joining organizations comes up as more and more people are getting actually attracted to the far left, Marxism, etc. People want to know what organizations should they join. I say join larger groups with real ties to the community that are actually active and healthy. People aren't clawing each other's eyes out, and it's not just some like book club of a bunch of nerds sitting in a room claiming that they have the one true key to politics. You can, on any day of the week, find Maoists versus Dungists duking it out online. It doesn't fucking matter when your country is getting taken over by fascists. The reason that we study theory and history, which in Marxism, because it is scientific, are closely linked, that reason is to solve present-day political problems. We have plenty of problems in the United States right now that need solving. So what organization should you join? You should join the organization that can actually deal with the problem discussed in this video, which is not just happening in Northern California, and it's not just the Northwest Territorial Imperative. There are these kinds of pushes, although this is one of the more historically grounded ones with deeper roots, but this kind of fascist push is happening in a lot of places. You should join the organization, whatever it is in your area, that can actually fight it. And I would suggest that that's probably an organization that is larger rather than smaller in numbers, that meets regularly, is active, is connected with the community, that has ties to the masses, in other words, mass roots, that can actually mobilize people when it puts out a call, that is not beholden to the Democratic Party in a way that holds it back from effective action. And I say Democratic Party, but that isn't beholden to any bourgeois interests in a way that holds it back from effective action. While we live in a bourgeois society where ties to bourgeois interests can be found everywhere because, they do make donations and they try to influence everything that they can because they're trying to hold on to their class rule. They're trying to hold on to capitalism. We've seen that in certain organizations, for example, the Democratic Party, those bourgeois influences just cannot be fought. Some organizations it's just been shown you cannot pull them left, you cannot really effectively fight. There are other organizations, such as DSA, which have some ties, for example, to the Democratic Party, but that in some areas that can actually be fought, and an influx of class-conscious proletarians, Marxists going into the org, can actually take it over, can reduce the Social Democrats and the bourgeois-aligned people to an insignificant minority, and can actually do useful work taking that org in a good direction, or that chapter of an org. And if it proves in practice not to be possible, not just in theory, but in practice, like you tried your best and it just is too strong to be fought, then take the people who are allied with you and form another organization or join another organization where you have that kind of leeway. For example, I've mentioned the Green Party in the past. The Green Party in the pandemic seems to be struggling with its right wing in terms of having some pretty reactionary ideas about being anti-vax and shit like that. That is a problem that wasn't there so much prior to the pandemic. Now it is. I think, for example, Howie Hawkins did some really good work getting some actually socialist thinking into the Green Party. Because every organization, whether it's DSA, whether it's the Green Party, whether it's the Boy Scouts, has a left-wing faction and a right-wing faction. These are relative terms. Within the org, you have the people who are more this way and the people who are more that way. So yeah, the Green Party, you can say overall they're left of the Dems, but their right wing is more hippie capitalist, green capitalist, reformist, petty bourgeois, whatever. And then you have a left wing that is actually eco-socialist, Marxist. Now, like I said, unfortunately, through the pandemic, I think that there is a lot of kind of reactionary anti-vax stuff going on in that party. So that's something, if you can fight it and have the org be something useful, then great. If you can't, then, like I said, take the people who are aligned with you, join another org, or if there's enough of you, form another org. There are people coming into this movement all the time. We need to meet each other. How do you meet people? You get out there and network. We need to get out into the orgs and find the lay of the land and see where we can do what we can do. And if it's not working in one place, then pack up and move to a different part, but you stay in the fight. I do agitation and education here on this channel that is aimed at a broad mass of people who are coming to socialism, probably in their earlier years of it, or for more established and knowledgeable socialists who just like the commentary or whatever it is. But the idea here is, yes, online, you can read, you can chat in the comments and whatever, but politics happens out there. It doesn't happen online. So what org should you join? The one that can put up effective resistance to this kind of stuff. You want to put your org on the map? You want to let people know that your org is a good org that should be joined and is doing useful work? Then solve a problem that your community is facing. That's how you get the attention of people who are tuned in, paying attention, and looking for stuff that they can get involved with. In the process of building a mass movement, you have the sort of visionary founders, the ones who are willing to go plant the flag even if no one else believes in it yet, and they just have, that vision, and they're going to go do the thing, and they're going to break the ground. Then you get people who are likely to join right after that. They themselves maybe don't have the vision, or they don't have the knowledge or wherewithal to go plant the flag themselves, but they're just sitting around going, I really wish somebody would plant that flag because I'll join them the second that they do. And then after that, you get people who are third and fourth tier who will join, but after a certain amount of other people have already joined. And that's just the way it is. You can't get mad at them. This is just kind of how these things work. So what are the keys to getting those people to join? Well, being active in the community and seeming like something that they, who are more reluctant, have a higher threshold, you got to overcome that threshold. So you make your presence a popular one in the community. You solve problems. You help people out. That's how people come to know and trust you, and then those with the higher threshold to participation, that gets overcome, and they warm up to you then. But really, all the online stuff, this is really inside baseball, and if you don't make it past that point, you're not really doing anything. I mean, you can, if you're not ready to join something or whatever, you can make contributions. You can donate resources, whatever it is. You can, volunteer for a day or whatever. You can repost links. You can do whatever. But the point is, most of this stuff happens out in the real world. That's where people are. That's where the means of production are. That's where people's lives happen. And that's where socialists need to be if our influence is going to be felt at all. In workplaces, in apartment buildings, in communities, whatever it is, we need to be out there actively engaged with other working people, helping to raise class consciousness in a way that actually strikes a chord. All right. I think I've said enough on this topic. Hopefully this has been a useful and informative video for you. We'll have more coming soon. In the meantime, if you have questions or comments, please do feel free to leave them in the comments area below. I always appreciate sincere, politely worded questions, links, story tips, whatever's on your mind. If you can't reach me through YouTube for some reason, you can try the Twitter DMs or a DM on Reddit. The links are all in the video description as usual, as is the link to Patreon. And while I'm talking about Patreon, thanks to the current patrons whose names are on the screen. If you would like to make a donation and get your name on the screen through Patreon, or not, you don't have to have your name on the screen if you don't want to have it up there. The link is patreon.com/socialismforall. You can either sign up for a recurring donation, or if you just want to do a one-time donation, you can sign up and then immediately cancel so you don't get billed next month. But at any rate, thanks very much to the patrons. All of these donations are extremely encouraging. It's not only materially helpful, I spend a lot of time doing these videos every month, and I wouldn't be able to do so many without the donations. And of course, with more donations, I could probably do more as well. But at any rate, I really appreciate everybody who has been contributing up to this point as a sustaining member, as well as past patrons. I really appreciate it, so thank you all very much for that. I'm going to head out, but again, thanks for watching, and we will catch you in the next video.